In the heart of the English Cotswolds, where gentle hills rolled beneath a gray sky and ancient stone manors dotted the landscape, Oakwood Manor stood like a monument to wealth and legacy. The estate was silent at dawn, except for the rhythmic sound of hooves on dewy grass and the occasional distant whinny that echoed through the morning fog. Here, thoroughbred horses were not just animals, they were investments, each one a number in a ledger, each bloodline a potential fortune or a disappointment. Inside the imposing stone barn, the air was crisp, tinged with the earthy scent of hay and the metallic hint of cold iron. Julian Croft, the master of Oakwood Manor, strode purposefully down the aisle. Tall, sharp-suited, his every movement calculated, he scanned the new crop of foals with the practiced eye of a man who had turned data into an empire. Beside him, the head groom kept careful pace, clipboard in hand, glancing nervously at Julian for a sign of approval or, far more likely, disappointment. Julian paused at the first stall. Star, a delicate gray filly with nervous, intelligent eyes, shrank back as he reached over the door. He did not speak to her, did not offer a gentle touch, but instead observed her legs, measured her shoulder, and finally made a note on his phone. No hint of affection crossed his face, only cold calculation. He moved to the next stall. Thunder, a broad-chested colt with a fiery streak of white down his nose, snorted, stamping a hoof. Julian's expression remained unmoved. He appraised the colt's stance, the straightness of his legs, the depth of his chest. No words of encouragement, no names spoken, just numbers, measurements, probabilities. Finally, Ash, a slender bay, smaller than the others, with a curious flicker in his gaze. Julian looked him over, sighed, and tapped at his phone screen. He turned to the head groom, voice flat and final. "These three," he said, pausing just long enough to ensure the moment stung. "Star, Thunder, and Ash. They don't meet the mark. Weak frames, uncertain potential. Prepare them for the autumn sale. Recover what you can." The head groom nodded silently, jotting the verdict down, shoulders sinking just a little as Julian swept past him, already done with this particular disappointment. The foals, sensing the finality in his tone, huddled together as the barn doors creaked open and the cold morning light spilled in. Outside, the world of privilege rolled on. Gardeners trimming immaculate hedges, staff in crisp uniforms moving quietly about their business, the manor itself looming behind a wrought iron gate. But not far from this world of pedigree and power, in a town where the cobblestone streets were worn by time and life moved at a gentler pace, Freya Miller's day had only just begun. Freya was a veterinary nurse at the local clinic, a woman whose hands bore the marks of work, whose eyes sparkled with kindness. In a cramped exam room cluttered with bandages and bottles, she knelt beside a trembling dog with a wounded paw, speaking softly as she dressed the injury, her touch gentle, patient. "There you go, sweetheart," she murmured, tying off the last bit of gauze. "That's better, isn't it?" Her phone buzzed on the counter. Wiping her hands on her scrubs, she answered, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The voice on the other end was familiar, her friend Ellie, who worked with one of the local horse trainers. "Freya, you won't believe the mess at the auctions this week. They're sending off another batch from Oakwood, purebred supposedly, but not good enough for Croft, so they get tossed out like trash. Some will go to new owners if they're lucky. The rest, well, you know how it goes." Freya listened in silence, heart tightening. She'd heard stories before, but every time the reality hit her anew. Horses whose only crime was falling short of someone's impossible standard. She looked at the dog beside her, and thought of the gentle gray filly, the bold colt, the slender bay she'd sometimes seen in passing on country trails, unaware that their fates were being decided in a ledger somewhere far above their heads. "Thanks for letting me know, Ellie," Freya said quietly, her mind already turning over a dozen impossible ideas. "I wish there was something we could do." After the call, she finished her shift, but the thought gnawed at her through every appointment. She saw a cat with a respiratory infection, a rabbit needing stitches, an old sheepdog whose eyes clouded with age. All the while the story replayed in her head. 3 young horses, marked as unworthy, about to be sent to a future that promised nothing but uncertainty. That evening, as dusk fell and rain began to patter softly against her apartment window, Freya sat at her tiny kitchen table, bills spread out before her, a mug of tea growing cold in her hands. She'd never owned a horse herself, not really. She'd ridden at lessons as a girl, helped out on neighbors' farms, learned to love their warmth and wildness. But horses were for the wealthy, for those who could afford stables and trainers, not for a woman still saving to fix the leaky roof above her head. Still, as she stared out at the darkened street, the idea would not leave her alone. What happened to the ones who didn't make the cut? Where did they end up? She pulled her laptop closer, searching through pages of listings and auction notices until finally she found it, the announcement for the upcoming sale. The names leapt out at her: Star, Thunder, Ash. Her breath caught. For a moment she hesitated. The cost, the risk, the uncertainty all pressed in on her. But then she remembered the way the old sheepdog had leaned into her touch that afternoon, the trust in his cloudy eyes, and something fierce and bright ignited within her. I can't just do nothing. She opened a new tab, started calculating her savings, the little she'd managed to put aside. Enough for a down payment on the roof, barely enough for a second-hand car, but maybe, just maybe enough to give 3 unwanted horses a chance. Rain tapped steadily at the window, the world outside shrouded in gray, but inside Freya's resolve burned clear and strong. Tomorrow, she decided, she would go to the auction. Whatever happened next, she would not turn away. The story, she realized, was no longer just about pedigree or profit. It was about hope, the kind that lingered, fragile but stubborn, in the hearts of those no one expected to matter. And so the first thread of destiny began to weave itself, quiet and unnoticed, through the storm. The sun was just a pale disk behind heavy clouds when Freya stepped out of her apartment the next morning, a worn canvas tote slung over her shoulder. The air tasted of damp earth and anticipation. Every step toward the auction yard felt like moving deeper into unknown territory, not just physically, but in her own life. She could still turn back, return to the safe routines of the clinic, the gentle comfort of mending small wounds and soothing worried owners. But she kept walking, propelled by something stronger than common sense. The auction was nothing like the grand events she'd glimpsed in magazines. No glossy banners, no catered champagne or flashes of cameras. Instead, it buzzed with raw, nervous energy. The yard was a patchwork of gravel and mud, bordered by sagging wooden fences. Paddocks were crowded with horses of every shape and size, from lean yearlings with uncertain eyes to weathered mares already resigned to their fates. Men in battered hats haggled loudly over prices, and the sharp scent of sweat and manure hung heavy in the air. In one corner, a small group of children pressed their faces to the rails, watching with wide eyes as the next lot was herded forward. No one here talked of bloodlines or potential, just weight, age, and whether the animal looked healthy enough to fetch a decent price. Freya's heart raced as she made her way through the crowd. She searched for the three she'd seen in the listings, repeating their names in her mind like a prayer. Star, Thunder, Ash. Her boots crunched over gravel, every sense on high alert. She wove between burly traders, her own presence almost invisible among men who lived and breathed in this world every day. Suddenly she saw them. They were penned in a corner far from the main ring, separated from the rest by a flimsy rope. Star was pressed close to Thunder, her ears pinned back in fear. Ash paced in small, anxious circles, glancing nervously at the people passing by. Freya could see every rib along his slender side, the faint scrape on his flank where he'd brushed against the railings. Their eyes, wide, white-rimmed, uncertain, locked onto her as she approached. A wave of emotion rose in Freya's chest. She knelt down, ignoring the mud that stained her jeans, and spoke softly through the fence. "It's all right. I see you," she whispered, letting them breathe in her calm. "You're not invisible, not today." She read the tags clipped to their halters. Each one bore the stamp of Oakwood Manor, written in precise, impersonal script. They really were the outcasts of a dynasty, cast aside for failing to live up to expectations. The auctioneer's bell rang, sharp, brash, calling buyers to attention. Freya straightened, her pulse pounding. A man in a heavy jacket with the weathered face of a seasoned horse trader sidled up beside her, eyeing the trio with practiced indifference. "Shame, isn't it?" he muttered, jerking his chin at the horses. "The small one might go for meat. The gray's got decent lines, but she spooks easy. Not much demand for nervous fillies these days." Freya felt her hands ball into fists in her pockets, but she said nothing. A heavy-set man with cold eyes and thick wrists leaned over the railing, scanning the tags. "You bidding, girl?" he sneered, his accent rough around the edges. "These ones'll drain your wallet faster than a busted pipe." Freya met his gaze, her voice steady. "Maybe I just see something you don't." He snorted and walked away, already bored. The sale began with a rush of bodies toward the small pen. The auctioneer, a wiry woman with a piercing whistle, barked out numbers at a speed that left Freya dizzy. Horses came and went, some snapped up by trainers or families looking for a bargain, others falling to the slow, inevitable rhythm of the kill buyers, the men who'd haul them away by the truckload, no questions asked. Then it was the turn of Star, Thunder, and Ash. "Lot 42, 3-year-old filly, Oakwood breeding, sound on her feet. Who'll start me at 500? The bidding was sluggish at first. Freya's throat felt dry as dust as she raised her hand. 500, she croaked. Her savings flashed before her eyes. Rent, repairs, every hard-earned penny from double shifts at the clinic. The meat buyer's hand shot up. 550. 600, Freya said, louder this time. The crowd took notice. A few heads turned, sizing her up. The trader from earlier joined in, nudging the price higher, but his interest was purely business. He'd flip the horses for a slim profit if he could. The auctioneer's eyes sparkled, sensing competition. 650, 750, Freya called, her voice wavering. A tense hush settled over the yard as the meat buyer hesitated, eyes narrowing. He studied Freya, maybe seeing the desperation in her face, maybe just calculating the margins. For a heartbeat, Freya felt time stretch, all her hopes dangling on the edge of a single bid. 800, the man snapped, challenging her. Freya closed her eyes. The sum was ridiculous, more than she'd planned, more than she could truly afford. But she looked at the trio, huddled together, and something inside her would not break. 900, she said, voice ringing out over the pen. The auctioneer's hammer hovered in the air. Going once. The meat buyer glared, but didn't raise his hand. Going twice. Freya's heart hammered in her chest. Sold! To the lady in the back! A smattering of applause rose, more out of surprise than support. Freya let out a long, shuddering breath as the hammer fell. She fumbled for her checkbook, her hands trembling as she scrawled out the payment. The sum made her stomach lurch, but she forced herself not to look back. This was no time for regrets. As she signed the paperwork, the stable hands unlatched the pen. Star hesitated, then took a tentative step toward her, followed by Thunder and Ash. The stable hand handed her their leads. "They're all yours now, miss," he said, sounding almost bemused. "Hope you know what you're getting into." Freya managed a shaky smile. "I'll figure it out," she replied, stroking Star's velvet nose. "Thank you." But even as the relief washed over her, new worries pressed in. Where would she keep them? How would she pay for their feed, their care, the vet bills that would surely come? She had no grand estate, no sprawling pastures, only the memory of an old field a friend sometimes let her use, a patch of green on the edge of town. One problem at a time, she told herself, gently urging the horses forward. The auction was still in full swing, but the world seemed to have narrowed to just the four of them, moving slowly toward the future. The crowd parted to let them pass, some eyes filled with pity, others with scorn. Freya heard the trader's voice behind her, half amused, half admiring. She's either got guts or she's out of her mind, but Freya barely heard him. Her mind was spinning with possibilities and fears, but beneath it all was a quiet, growing sense of hope. She'd done something no one expected. She'd taken a stand, however small, against a world that counted worth in cold numbers. As she led Star, Thunder, and Ash to the battered trailer she'd borrowed for the day, she glanced back once at the auction yard, at the men, the noise, the relentless tide of commerce. She knew she was out of her depth, knew that the road ahead would be hard and uncertain. But as the horses nudged closer to her, seeking comfort in her presence, Freya felt a resolve take root deep inside her chest. She didn't have pedigree, she didn't have wealth, but she had something else. The stubborn, reckless courage to bet everything on compassion. As she drove away from the auction, the autumn wind rising outside the windows, Freya promised herself, and the 3 lives she'd just saved, that this was only the beginning. The future would be uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, she believed it could be different. She believed, fiercely and utterly, that hope was worth fighting for. The drive back from the auction felt impossibly long. The battered trailer rattled with every bump in the road, each jolt echoing Freya's tangled thoughts. In the rearview mirror, she caught glimpses of Star's anxious eyes, Thunder's restless shifting, and Ash standing perfectly still, as if uncertain whether any of this was real. Freya gripped the steering wheel tighter. She had taken the first leap, but what next? The field she'd rented from Mrs. Hawkins sat at the edge of town, little more than a ramshackle fence around a patchwork of grass and wildflowers. But it was safe. For now. Rain threatened as she arrived, the sky low and heavy, the scent of wet earth in the air. Freya parked the trailer and hurried to the gate, fumbling with the old chain as the horses shifted behind her, their hooves thumping softly. She led them one by one into their new world, Star, wide-eyed but curious. Thunder, head held high as if ready to charge at shadows. Ash, so quiet she had to coax him out, whispering gentle encouragement. The field was humble, but to them it must have seemed like freedom. Star tested the boundaries first, trotting to the far corner before doubling back, ears perked. Thunder rolled in the grass, kicking his legs in a burst of joy that surprised Freya, and perhaps even himself. Ash hesitated at the edge, taking it all in before following the others, his movements cautious but growing bolder. Freya stood back, letting them explore, her heart aching with a mix of pride and worry. She had to make this work. She checked the fence, patched a loose board, and set out a bucket of water and what little feed she'd been able to buy after the auction. It wasn't much: oats, carrots, a few apples from her kitchen, but it was a start. For the next week, Freya's life became a dance of exhaustion and determination. Every morning before dawn, she fed the trio and checked their injuries. Star's hooves were chipped from the hard auction yard, so Freya carefully cleaned and wrapped them. Thunder had a shallow cut on his hind leg, and Ash seemed to shiver even on warm days, so Freya layered old horse blankets over his back and spoke to him in a low, reassuring voice. The clinic shifts grew longer. She picked up every extra hour she could, treating everything from farm cats to elderly ponies, her mind always half in the field with her new charges. Sometimes, between patients, she'd check her phone, researching nutrition plans, inexpensive supplements, basic training routines. At night, exhausted but determined, she'd walk back out to the field with a lantern, double-checking the horses, smoothing their manes, and promising them that tomorrow would be better. Word spread quickly in the small town. Some people stopped her on the street, offering awkward encouragement. Others shook their heads, calling her brave or foolish, sometimes both in the same breath. But every time she looked at Star, Thunder, and Ash, she felt the weight of her choice settle into something like hope. Autumn faded into winter, the grass thinned, the wind grew sharper, and Freya learned the meaning of sacrifice. She traded her plans to fix the leaking roof for hay and grain, patched holes in her boots with duct tape, and counted every penny until it hurt. There were nights when the cold crept into her bones, when doubt gnawed at her resolve. But she pressed on because the horses pressed on too. The months became a blur of small victories and relentless work. Star learned to trust her touch, standing still while Freya cleaned her hooves. Thunder, once skittish, grew protective of the herd, standing watch as Ash grazed quietly in his shadow. Ash, slowest to adjust, surprised her one morning by nuzzling her shoulder, a silent thank you for warmth and safety. When spring arrived, the world softened. Wildflowers returned to the field, and the horses' coats grew glossy under the longer days. Freya worked with them gently, never pushing too hard, rewarding progress with kind words and treats. She started with groundwork, leading Star in lazy circles, asking Thunder to halt and stand, coaxing Ash over fallen branches until his steps grew confident. Friends came to visit, sometimes just to watch, sometimes to help with chores. Ellie brought extra feed, and Mrs. Hawkins, who owned the land, dropped by with a bag of carrots and a shy smile. "You've got away with them, Freya," she said one morning, watching as Star trotted up to nuzzle Freya's palm. Not everyone would have bothered. Freya shrugged, a little embarrassed. They deserve better, that's all. The seasons spun onward. There were hard days, a bout of colic that kept Freya up all night, a torn fence after a summer storm, a surprise vet bill that left her wondering if she'd have to give up. But there were good days, too. The first time all three horses galloped together across the field, the way their coats shone in the golden evening light. The moments when Freya felt something like joy crack open inside her, fragile but real. The years blurred by in a series of montages, hay bales stacked against winter wind, thunderstorms spent sheltering together in the old shed, mornings filled with soft knickers and warm breath against her hands. Through every struggle, Freya grew tougher, her bond with the horses deepening in ways she'd never imagined. One summer afternoon, as the world buzzed with bees and distant laughter from a nearby picnic, Freya found herself leaning on the fence, watching the trio graze. Star had grown into a striking mare, her nervousness now a bright alertness. Thunder was solid and powerful, his white blaze gleaming, while Ash, though still smaller, moved with an understated grace. Freya felt a swell of pride and wondered if, just maybe, she'd done something extraordinary. That was when Ellie showed up, waving a brightly colored flyer. "You need to see this," she called, passing the paper through the rails. It was an announcement for the upcoming Cotswold Gold Cup, a prestigious event known throughout the region. The prize money was impressive, the competitors legendary, and for a moment, Freya laughed. "I'm not a professional, Ellie. We're hardly ready for anything like that." Ellie grinned, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Why not try? Stranger things have happened." The idea gnawed at Freya for days. She watched her horses, remembering the stories she'd read as a child. Tales of underdogs and long shots, of triumphs born of hope. Late one evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, she sat at her kitchen table and filled out the application, heart pounding. She listed herself as owner and trainer, listed Star, Thunder, and Ash as her team. Her hands shook as she sealed the envelope. When she dropped the form in the mailbox the next morning, she felt both terrified and alive. As summer deepened, Freya's routine shifted again. She set up makeshift jumps in the field using old barrels and broom handles, started timing practice runs, and focused on building trust more than speed. The horses responded. Star danced through dressage routines with unexpected elegance. Thunder tackled cross-country challenges with determination. Ash found his courage and matched his teammates step for step. Some days ended in frustration, others in small victories, but always with the sense that something new was possible. Freya's friends cheered her on, even as the rest of the town whispered about the crazy girl with the 3 unwanted horses daring to dream big. But Freya was no longer the girl who hesitated at the auction gate, paralyzed by doubt. She was someone who had survived, who had built a life and a family from cast-offs and hope. As the day of the Cotswold Gold Cup approached, Freya stood at the fence, watching the sunset paint the world in gold. Star, Thunder, and Ash grazed peacefully nearby, their bodies strong, their spirits unbroken. "Tomorrow," she whispered, pressing a hand to her heart. "Tomorrow we race," and in that moment, she knew, no matter what happened, they had already won. The morning of the Cotswold Gold Cup dawned bright and sharp, sunlight slicing through the mist that blanketed the rolling green hills. Freya barely slept the night before. Every worry she'd ever had seemed to come alive in the shadows of her small apartment. Would the trailer hold up for the trip? Would her horses freeze up with nerves? Would she embarrass herself in front of the world? Still, as the alarm sounded, she forced herself up, checked her list twice, and loaded Star, Thunder, and Ash into the trailer with trembling hands and a steady voice. The drive to the showground was a patchwork of farmland, sleepy villages, and winding lanes crowded with luxury horse boxes that cost more than her home. Each mile closer to the arena pressed a little more doubt into her chest. But as she turned into the gravel drive, she saw it all stretched out before her. Rows of shining trailers, handlers in matching uniforms, polished boots and pressed jackets everywhere she looked. Freya parked in the far lot, her battered truck drawing glances from passers-by. She did her best to ignore them as she led her trio to their temporary stall. 3 out-of-place horses, coats brushed until they shone, but their halters frayed, their lead ropes faded from years of use. Around her, everything moved with practiced precision. Stable hands moved like a pit crew, tending to gleaming horses with manes braided tight and coats shining like silk. Owners lounged with coffee in hand, talking about breeding, rankings, and the size of their investment portfolios. Freya caught snippets. "This one's a son of Sovereign's reign. She's out of Lady Aurelia. Did you see the price on that new French import?" And felt her stomach twist. She was a nobody, surrounded by legends and legacy. She stroked Star's neck, steadying them both. "We belong here as much as anyone," she whispered, letting her words drift like a shield against the judgments all around them. The sound of laughter made her turn. Down the aisle strode Julian Croft, flanked by sponsors and partners. He was dressed impeccably, his crisp navy jacket emblazoned with the Oakwood logo. Every step announced his authority, a king surveying his court. He didn't glance her way at first, but as he neared, one of his associates pointed at Freya and her horses. Julian's gaze swept over them, not a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He leaned toward his companion, voice low but carrying. "It's a shame, really," he said, surveying Freya's group. "When anyone can enter, it dilutes the quality of the sport. These events used to mean something." His words landed like a slap. Freya stiffened, refusing to let him see her hurt. But deep down, a part of her burned, not with shame, but with defiance. She squared her shoulders, met his gaze when he glanced back, and then turned her attention to preparing her horses, shutting out the murmurs, the sidelong glances, the soft laughter at her expense. The day passed in a blur of nerves and activity. The dressage arena was their first test. Freya led Star in, her own heart pounding louder than the applause. The judges wore expressions honed by decades of scrutiny, their eyes lingering on Star's unconventional build and her plain tack. For a second, Freya faltered, but then she felt Star's confidence beneath her, the result of every gentle hour spent in the field, every whispered word and patient touch. The routine wasn't perfect. Star hesitated at the start, nearly breaking her rhythm, but Freya steadied her, guiding her through each movement with trust. As they finished, there was a scattered ripple of applause. Freya caught a judge's raised eyebrow, surprise, maybe even respect, and her heart soared. Next was the cross-country course, notorious for its punishing hills and tricky water jumps. Thunder's time to shine. As Freya mounted, she could feel the tension in the air, competitors and spectators alike watching the unknown girl on her scruffy bay. Thunder responded to her voice, clearing the first few jumps with surprising agility. The wind whipped through Freya's hair as they galloped, the world narrowing to the thud of hooves and the sound of her own breath. They tackled a tricky bank, splashed through water, and came up over the final hedge with a burst of speed that drew a gasp from the crowd. Back at the stalls, Freya checked the scoreboard with trembling fingers. She didn't expect to see her name, but there it was, Miller, F., listed just inside the top 10. Ellie appeared at her side, clutching a coffee and grinning. "You did it," she whispered, as if afraid to break the spell. "You're really in the running." Freya shook her head, dazed. "I just wanted them to have a chance." As the afternoon wore on, the tension grew. Freya overheard more whispers, saw more stares. Some competitors congratulated her, their praise tinged with surprise. Others were less kind, making jokes just loud enough to hear. "Think she'll sell them if she places? Maybe she needs the money. Or maybe Oakwood will want them back, now that they see what they tossed away." Freya ignored them, focusing on her horses. She checked their legs, brushed their coats, murmured words of encouragement. Ash nuzzled her arm. Thunder stamped impatiently. Star dozed in the sunlight. Here, in this small circle of trust, she found her strength. The day's last event ended in a flurry of excitement. A pair of seasoned favorites stumbled, opening the rankings for underdogs like Freya. As the crowd filed out, a hush settled over the stables. Freya sat on an upturned bucket, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. She closed her eyes, letting herself breathe, her mind already replaying every detail, every moment. Julian Croft's voice cut through the silence. He approached, flanked by his assistant. His eyes, once dismissive, now burned with a cold intensity. "Miss Miller," he said, his tone clipped, polite only by habit. "I understand those horses are from Oakwood stock." He studied her, searching for a reaction. "How did you come by them?" Freya met his gaze, refusing to shrink. "Bought them at auction, fair and square," she replied. "You didn't want them." Julian's lips thinned. "They're performing well. I'll make you an offer. 10 times what you paid." Freya stared at him. For a heartbeat, she imagined all the things that money could solve: repairs, debts, a future free of worry. But then she looked at her horses, saw their trust, their hope, and shook her head. "You had your chance to value them," she said quietly. "Now, they're priceless." She turned away, her heart pounding. Julian hesitated, then spun on his heel, storming off into the darkening evening. The moment hung in the air, charged with something new: respect, fear, or maybe the first hint of real rivalry. As dusk settled over the showgrounds, Freya led her horses back to the trailer. Around her, the world of champions buzzed with news of the day's upsets, of the unknown girl and her miracle horses. Freya felt both out of place and exactly where she belonged. She looked at Star, Thunder, and Ash, their coats dusted with sunlight and sweat, their eyes bright and eager for what came next. Tomorrow, she thought, everything would change. But tonight, they had each other, and a dream no one could take away. Night blanketed the Cotswolds in a heavy, velvet hush. Freya could barely sleep, her nerves humming with a mixture of disbelief and anticipation. She lay on the makeshift cot she'd set up in the back of her truck, listening to the low sounds of the showgrounds, distant voices, the occasional snort from a restless horse, the soft tick of cooling metal. Her mind raced, replaying the events of the day, the stares, the whispered jibes, the stunning reality that her name, Miller, F., had broken into the top 10. In a world where family legacy and million-pound pedigrees meant everything, it felt as if the laws of nature had briefly bent in her favor. As dawn crept in, painting the horizon with streaks of gold and pink, Freya rose and pulled on her worn boots. She slipped quietly out to the stalls, the air chilly and bracing, the grass wet with dew. Star, Thunder, and Ash perked up as she arrived, nickering softly, nudging her for treats and attention. She fed them, checked their legs, and brushed out their manes with slow, steady strokes. Each small ritual calmed her, centering her in the present, and steadying the storm of doubts inside. Word had spread quickly about her performance. As she walked to the main barn for the daily schedule, people she'd never met stopped her in the aisle. "You're the girl with the Oakwood rejects, right? Heard you gave Croft a run for his money yesterday. How'd you turn those throwaways into top 10 material?" Freya responded with a polite nod, not trusting herself to say more. Some of the comments were supportive, others edged with resentment or skepticism, like they were waiting for her to stumble and prove she didn't belong. Inside the organizer's tent, the leaderboard glowed on a digital display. Her name was still there, just above the cutoff. As Freya stared, her skin prickled. The reality of her situation hit her all over again. She was just a veterinary nurse from a tiny town, up against riders with world-class trainers and horses worth more than everything she owned. But here she was, and her story was spreading. On the far side of the tent, Julian Croft paced in tight circles, talking quietly to his assistant, his face thunderous. The sight sent a bolt of anxiety through Freya. He wasn't the kind of man to let a surprise upset go unchallenged, especially not from a girl who'd bested his judgment. She ducked out of the tent, eager to avoid another confrontation. Back at her trailer, Ellie greeted her with a thermos of coffee and a grin. "You're making headlines, Freya. Did you see that article online? The nurse and the nobodies, underdogs, shake up the cup. People are rooting for you. They want a story like this." Freya shook her head, unable to help a nervous laugh. "I'm just trying to keep up. I can't believe we made it this far." Ellie squeezed her shoulder. "Believe it. You've done something amazing, even if it ends today." Freya's schedule was packed. Practice rounds, a veterinary check, and another event. A speed trial designed to test reflexes and coordination. She led Thunder to the warm-up arena, the horse alert but calm beneath her hands. As they trotted in, Freya noticed a knot of reporters gathered near the ring. One, a tall woman with a press badge, waved her over. "Miss Miller, can I get a comment? How does it feel to go up against the biggest names in British racing?" Freya hesitated, then answered quietly, "It feels like a dream. I just want to do right by my horses. They deserve their chance." She saw Julian Croft watching from across the arena, his gaze hard as stone. As the race began, she felt the weight of his attention pressing down. The pressure was immense, but so was her determination. Thunder burst from the gate, responding to her cues with almost telepathic clarity. They zigzagged through cones and over low jumps, Freya keeping her voice steady, her hands gentle but sure. The crowd, drawn in by the unexpected drama, cheered them on. At the final turn, Thunder slipped, just a minor falter, but enough to drop their time a notch. They crossed the finish to another ripple of applause. It wasn't perfect, but it kept her in the running. Freya patted Thunder's neck, pride mingling with relief. As she walked him back to the stall, a uniformed official flagged her down. "Mr. Croft would like a word," the man said, stiffly polite. Freya's gut clenched, but she nodded, handing Thunder's lead to Ellie. She followed the official to a shaded bench near the sponsor tents, where Julian waited, immaculate and unreadable. "Miss Miller," he began, not bothering with small talk. "I don't believe in leaving things to chance. You and your horses have made an impression. I'll say this one more time. I'll buy them. 10 times what you paid. You can have a future in this sport. Money, training, the best facilities. Or you can go back to your clinic and patch up sheepdogs for the rest of your life." Freya's breath caught. The offer was life-changing. She imagined her debts disappearing, her horses safe in luxury stables, her family's struggles finally eased. But then she remembered the look in Star's eyes the first night, the way Ash leaned into her touch, Thunder's trust. These horses weren't just assets or statistics. They were her family. She met Julian's gaze, voice steady. "I'm not for sale. Neither are they. Not now. Not ever." For the first time, she saw a flicker of something. Not anger, but respect, or maybe the beginning of it. Julian nodded slowly. "You're stubborn. That's dangerous in this business. But I admire it in a way. Just remember, sentiment doesn't win trophies." He turned away, his entourage falling into step behind him. Freya stood alone in the shade, her heart pounding, sweat chilling on her back. Her refusal would make things harder. She could feel it, the scrutiny, the subtle sabotage, the quiet threats of those who couldn't stand to lose. Back at the stalls, Ellie was waiting, eyes wide. "You told him off, didn't you?" she whispered. Freya managed a tired smile. "I think I did, for better or worse." That afternoon, a new energy filled the air. The competition intensified as the field narrowed. Judges watched her horses with more curiosity. Spectators cheered louder when she entered the ring, some out of genuine support, others hoping for an upset or a spectacular failure. Freya felt both exposed and electrified. Star excelled in the freestyle section, moving with a grace that drew unexpected applause. Ash, still the underdog, surprised everyone by acing a tricky obstacle course, his careful steps and sharp mind making up for his smaller frame. Thunder's stamina carried them through the day's final endurance trial, keeping her name on the leaderboard as the sun dipped behind the hills. As darkness crept across the showgrounds, Freya sat alone with her horses, the glow of the arena lights painting their silhouettes in gold. She whispered promises and thanks, tracing her journey from that cold, desperate auction to this stage. She thought of the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the quiet hours spent believing in something no one else could see. Her name, and the names of her horses, were no longer just afterthoughts on a spreadsheet or the butt of a cruel joke. They were spoken with respect, with curiosity, even awe. For the first time, Freya felt the tide turning, but she also knew the storm wasn't over. Power never surrendered easily. In the shadows, Julian Croft was plotting his next move, unwilling to let the legacy of Oakwood slip through his fingers, especially to a nobody with more heart than pedigree. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. Tonight, Freya allowed herself a moment of quiet pride, her hands tangled in Star's mane, Thunder's breath warm on her cheek, Ash curled beside her like a promise. For the first time, her dream felt real, and she was ready to fight for it, no matter what came next. The day of the final showdown arrived with a bite of autumn wind. Freya barely slept, her nerves stretched thin as wire, but the determination in her chest was unbreakable. The morning mist clung to the showgrounds, painting everything in shades of gray and silver, as if the world itself held its breath. Freya rose early, long before the first hints of sunlight, and checked on her horses. Star blinked at her sleepily, her gray coat shimmering with dew. Thunder, always the early riser, nudged at the empty feed bucket, and Ash stood quietly, watching her with a steady gaze that radiated trust. She spoke softly to each of them, her words a promise and a prayer. "You're ready," she whispered, stroking Star's neck. "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of all of us." The buzz of competition was everywhere. As Freya made her way toward the stables, she could sense the change in the air. More photographers than ever, reporters milling around, competitors eyeing her with a mix of curiosity, envy, and something else. A hush fell as she walked by, as if her every step might change the outcome of the day. The final round was the show jumping event, known for its unforgiving design. The course was a labyrinth of brightly painted rails, daunting verticals, sharp turns, and tricky combinations designed to test the nerves of even the most seasoned riders. It was a challenge meant to separate legends from the hopeful, the worthy from the lucky. Freya's heart hammered as she drew her position. She would ride last, the underdog saving her turn for when the stakes were highest. She watched, silent and focused, as the other riders entered the ring, their horses gleaming, their movements rehearsed to perfection. Some soared over every obstacle, others faltered, rails clattering to the ground, dreams crumbling with each knock. Star watched too, ears flicking, muscles tensed in anticipation. Freya stroked her mane, drawing strength from the steady rhythm of her breath. The sun finally burned away the last of the mist as the announcer called her name. Now entering the ring, Freya Miller, riding Star. A hush rippled across the crowd. Freya gathered her reins, took a long breath, and entered the ring, the world shrinking to the sound of hooves on turf and the pounding of her heart. She could feel every eye on her, including Julian Croft's, his gaze cold and sharp from the VIP box. But Freya blocked it all out, focusing only on the path ahead and the horse beneath her. Star was trembling, not from fear, but from eagerness, from the electric anticipation of what was possible. At the first fence, Freya steadied her hands. Star launched forward, clearing the rail with inches to spare. The crowd let out a breath. Freya's focus narrowed, one obstacle at a time, her mind counting strides, her body moving with the rhythm they'd practiced 1,000 times in the quiet of their lonely field. Fence after fence they soared. Star's ears flicked back, reading Freya's intent, responding to the smallest cue. At the halfway mark, the hardest combination awaited. A tight double followed by a sharp rollback. Freya whispered encouragement. Star dug in, and together they threaded the needle, the rails staying silent. Every moment felt like it stretched forever and passed in a heartbeat. On the last turn, Freya caught a glimpse of Julian. His jaw was set, eyes narrowed, his pride hanging in the balance. Star felt the tension, muscles coiling like springs, and Freya spoke her name again. Just once, soft and certain. Go, girl. The final jump was the highest. Freya and Star approached, breath held, legs gathering. For a split second, time seemed to pause. Then they flew. The rails stayed up. A roar erupted from the stands. Applause, shouts, the pounding of hundreds of hands and feet. Freya felt tears sting her eyes as she circled back, Star dancing beneath her, alive with joy. The score flashed onto the board. Clear round, one of the fastest times of the day. She slid off Star, dropping to her knees, arms wrapped around her horse's neck. Ellie and the other helpers rushed in, laughing, crying, hugging her and the horses, their cheers mixing with the crowd. In the VIP box, Julian's face was carved from stone. He turned away before the cameras could catch his reaction, walking out in a swirl of expensive cologne and bruised ego. But the damage was done. His best horses had stumbled. His predictions had failed. The world was watching a new story unfold. The awards ceremony was a blur. Freya stood on the highest podium, Star's lead in her hand, thunder and ash flanking her sides. Her jeans were still dusty, her jacket patched and faded, but none of it mattered now. The gold medal was heavy in her palm, the weight of 1,000 impossible dreams. The announcer's voice trembled with excitement as he listed her name. The crowd chanted, "Miller, Miller," turning her into a legend in real time. Reporters crowded in, flashbulbs popping, microphones thrust forward. How did it feel to make history? What would you say to the people who doubted you? What's next for you and your horses? Freya took a breath, looking at her small family, and smiled. I just wanted to give them a chance. That's all any of us ever needs. As the sun dipped lower, she spotted Julian Croft lingering at the edge of the crowd, his eyes hard but no longer contemptuous. He nodded once, stiffly, a silent concession. For now, the feud was over. But the world had changed. Back in the stables, Freya let the reality settle in. Star nuzzled her shoulder. Thunder rolled contentedly. Ash dozed with his nose in a pile of hay. Around them, the other competitors celebrated, some with genuine warmth, others out of habit. Freya didn't care. Her win wasn't just a trophy or a check. It was proof that worth could be found in the discarded, that hope could outlast cynicism, that love could rewrite destinies. As darkness fell, Freya led her horses outside to cool down, away from the noise and lights. The air was crisp, the sky velvet blue. She walked in silence, her boots sinking into the soft ground, her hands steady on the lead ropes. "You did it," she whispered. Not just to the horses, but to herself, to the frightened girl she'd been at the auction, to the stubborn woman who refused to quit. For one golden moment, everything felt possible. And in that moment, Freya knew this victory was just the beginning. The world would not forget her name, or the names of the horses who proved that greatness could come from anywhere, as long as someone believed enough to give them a chance. News of Freya's unlikely triumph exploded across the equestrian world like a summer storm. Within hours, clips of her and Star clearing the final rail went viral. The underdog story capturing hearts well beyond the Cotswolds. Articles appeared online. Unknown nurse rides auction rejects to glory. Oakwood's Outcasts take the cup. Strangers sent messages of support and congratulations. Her phone buzzed until the battery died. Even people in town who'd once doubted her stopped her on the street, shaking her hand, asking after the horses. For one shining moment, Freya Miller became a name people remembered, but celebration soon gave way to a new, heavier reality. 2 days after the Gold Cup, a letter arrived, thick and official, the emblem of the British Equestrian Federation embossed in gold on the envelope. Freya tore it open at her kitchen table, hands trembling with hope and fear. Dear Ms. Miller, we are pleased to invite you, as champion of the Cotswold Gold Cup, to represent the United Kingdom in the upcoming European Championships in Saumur, France. Your victory has earned not only the admiration of our community, but the right to compete among the best. Please respond by... She read it again, then a third time. The room spun. For years, she'd dreamed in private, telling herself it was enough just to give Star, Thunder, and Ash a good home. Now she was being called to the world stage, and everything would change. Her phone rang. It was Ellie, who'd obviously heard the news before she'd finished the letter. You have to go. Ellie's voice sparkled with excitement. This is your chance, Freya. Think of what it means. For you. For them. Freya pressed a hand to her forehead. It means money, she whispered, looking around her tiny, cluttered kitchen. Travel, stabling, fees. I don't have a sponsor, Ellie. My car barely made it to the Gold Cup. Ellie's tone softened. I know, but you'll find a way. You always do. For days, Freya walked through her life in a fog. She went to her shifts at the clinic, nodded through conversations with patients, but her mind kept returning to that invitation. Each evening, she walked the field with her horses, running her fingers through Star's mane, resting her head against Thunder's strong shoulder, whispering encouragement to Ash. They had become more than rescues or pets. They were partners in something extraordinary. But the cost loomed like a thunderhead. Her winnings from the Cup barely covered the basics. Plane tickets, quarantine stabling, new tack for the international standards. It added up to a sum she could never dream of on her own. As the days passed, the pressure built. The media wanted more interviews. Locals started talking, some supportive, others skeptical. Did she really belong among the best in Europe? Could she handle the pressure? Or would she be exposed as a fluke, a one-hit wonder? Late one night, unable to sleep, Freya sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by lists and bills, calculating and recalculating. The numbers never worked. Every solution brought more questions. The next morning, a knock came at her door. It was a courier carrying an envelope marked urgent. She signed and tore it open. Inside was a crisp letter on heavy paper, bearing the letterhead of Croft Holdings. Ms. Miller, congratulations on your recent victory. I understand you face challenges in accepting your invitation to Saumur. Croft Holdings is prepared to offer you full sponsorship, training, equipment, logistics, in exchange for the opportunity to formally acquire Star, Thunder, and Ash for our program. Please contact my office within 48 hours if you wish to discuss further. Freya's hands shook with anger. He hadn't given up. Even now, Julian Croft was determined to buy back his lost legacy, to reclaim the glory he'd thrown away. The offer was almost comically generous, a sum that could pay her debts, buy her family a new home, give her horses every comfort. But it came at the cost of everything she valued most. She crumpled the letter, feeling tears prick her eyes. For a long time she sat in silence, wrestling with fear and pride. She wanted to go to France, to prove herself, but not by selling her soul. The next day, Freya returned to the field. As she brushed Star, Ellie arrived with a brown paper bag full of fresh apples and the latest news. You'll never believe it, Freya. There's talk. Sponsors, small ones, locals. The feed store wants to help, and so does that saddle shop in town. Even the veterinary supply place is offering to donate some supplements if you'll mention them in your interviews. Freya blinked, hope flickering. Why would they do that? Ellie grinned. Because you're their hero now. You did what nobody else could, and people want to be part of it. For the first time, possibility outweighed fear. Over the next week, offers trickled in. Modest, sometimes just in-kind support. Feed, travel gear, the loan of a horse box from a local farmer. Freya accepted every bit of help she could, grateful but determined to keep her horses her own. But while support grew, so did the pressure. Word spread that Julian Croft wasn't finished. A story appeared online, questioning Freya's credentials, her horse's health, even suggesting she'd used questionable tactics to win the cup. Anonymous social media accounts sprang up overnight, repeating rumors and spreading doubt. Freya tried to ignore it, but it was everywhere. Strangers emailed her, some supportive, some cruel. Neighbors she'd known for years started asking pointed questions. At night, her confidence wavered. What if they were right? What if she'd just been lucky? Then, unexpectedly, Luke, an old friend from her riding school days, showed up. He found her by the field at dusk, shoulders hunched, face drawn with exhaustion. He handed her his phone, showing her a video. It was a compilation of messages from riders, fans, and even a few of the Cup's judges. Each one spoke of her courage, her dedication, the inspiration she'd given others. "You did something they couldn't," Luke said quietly. "Don't let anyone take that away from you." For the first time in days, Freya smiled. She realized that this journey was no longer just hers. She carried the hopes of everyone who'd ever felt unseen, unvalued, everyone who'd ever dreamed of a chance. The next morning, she wrote her response to the British Equestrian Federation. "I accept the invitation. We will represent our country with pride." She paused, then added, "And for the record, Star, Thunder, and Ash are not for sale." She pressed send, her hands steady at last. She walked out to the field where her 3 horses waited, grazing in the golden light of morning. "We're going to France," she whispered, laughter mixing with tears. "Ready or not, we're going to show them all what we can do." And as the wind rippled the grass and the sun rose higher, Freya felt something she hadn't known in a long time. Not just hope, but certainty. No matter how hard the world pushed back, she and her horses would keep moving forward, together and on their own terms. The weeks leading up to the European Championships in Saumur moved both too slowly and far too fast. Every morning, Freya woke in a panic, haunted by what needed doing. Vet checks, practice rounds, new travel forms, a mountain of logistics she'd never imagined. The entire town seemed to know her schedule. Friends stopped by to wish her luck, strangers sent letters and hand-drawn cards, and local shops left anonymous gifts on her porch, a new grooming kit, a monogrammed blanket, even a lucky horseshoe. But behind the support, an undercurrent of tension kept her on edge. It began with small things: rumors online about her horses, whispers at the feed store, strangers lingering near the field's fence line. At first, Freya tried to shrug it off. People talk, she told herself, but she couldn't shake the sense that someone was watching, waiting for her to stumble. Then the attacks grew bolder. An anonymous email landed in her inbox, questioning her qualifications and her horse's health. The sender claimed to have inside knowledge from the Gold Cup, warning that Freya would be exposed on the international stage. The language was clipped, professional, but the threat was clear. Her stomach twisted as she read it again and again, trying to find any hint of who was behind it. But deep down, she knew. Julian Croft had made good on his word to find a weakness, and he wasn't alone. Social media turned vicious. Fake profiles popped up, spreading rumors that Star had once failed a drug test, that Thunder had been illegally imported, that Ash wasn't even a thoroughbred. The stories grew wilder with each day, designed to shake her confidence and turn supporters into skeptics. Local reporters showed up at her work, asking leading questions, and even some old friends became wary, uncertain what was true. Freya felt the walls closing in. She started waking in the middle of the night, convinced someone was outside her window. She double-checked locks, left the radio on in the kitchen, and slept with her phone beside her pillow. Every morning, her eyes stung from lack of sleep. Her hands trembled as she saddled her horses. Even the animals sensed her unease. Star grew more jumpy, Thunder tossed his head, and Ash stayed closer than ever, his body a warm, silent anchor. It almost worked. For the first time since the auction, Freya found herself thinking about quitting, She would stand in the field at dusk, hands in her pockets, staring at the distant lights of Oakwood Manor and wonder, was this a battle she could win? What if she was making it worse for everyone? Herself, her horses, even her town. Sometimes she thought of Julian Croft's offer, the promise of security, the chance to walk away. Every time she did, something inside her twisted with guilt and anger. Then, one evening, as the last light faded, Luke arrived. He was one of the few who hadn't drifted away during the storm. Without a word, he handed her his phone and played a video. It was a montage, clips from people across the country, strangers and friends, sending her messages of hope. There were little girls in riding helmets, elderly farmers, a woman who'd lost her horse to illness, a young man who'd aged out of foster care and found solace at a riding stable. Each one thanked her for believing, for fighting, for giving them someone to root for. Luke sat down beside her in the grass, letting the silence stretch. "They don't care about the rumors," he said quietly. "They see you. They know what you've done. Don't let Croft or anyone take that away." Freya closed her eyes, letting the words soak in. Slowly, she felt her heart steady. The world outside could turn cruel, but here under the endless sky with her horses and her friend, she remembered why she'd started. This wasn't about headlines or revenge. It was about star, thunder, and ash, about every lost cause and second chance. The next day, she changed her routine. She started running with the horses at dawn, pushing herself as hard as she pushed them. She posted her own videos online, candid moments of training, her laughing when thunder stole her glove, Ash learning a new trick, Star nuzzling a young fan at the clinic. She wrote about her journey, honestly and openly, answering questions, sharing setbacks as well as victories. She let people see the fear and the hope, the struggle and the stubbornness. Support returned, stronger than before. The feed store owner gave her a pep talk every time she picked up supplies. The saddle shop delivered a custom-fit bridle for Star, free of charge. At the clinic, even clients who'd once doubted her now cheered her on, their pets sporting tiny blue and white ribbons for Team Freya. But the threats didn't stop. A reporter cornered her at the ferry terminal, waving a stack of paperwork and demanding comment about an anonymous tip. Another email arrived, this time warning that her horses would be checked for performance enhancers at Saumur, that any irregularity would be cause for disqualification and scandal. Freya saved each message, forwarding them to the authorities, but the fear lingered, a shadow she couldn't quite outrun. When the day of departure finally arrived, the whole town gathered to see her off. Friends and neighbors packed the narrow lane, waving banners and flags. Ellie pressed a lucky token into her hand. Mrs. Hawkins brought a basket of snacks for the journey. Luke, gruff and quiet, offered to take care of her apartment and mail while she was gone. Star, Thunder, and Ash loaded calmly into the borrowed trailer, their coats gleaming, their eyes bright. For all the chaos and pain, Freya saw pride in the faces around her, not just for the victories, but for the fight, the refusal to quit. The ferry ride across the channel was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. Freya stayed with the horses, pacing the deck, checking and rechecking their paperwork. The crossing was choppy. At one point, a loud bang from the cargo hold sent Star into a panic, but Freya's calm voice soothed her, and the crisis passed. On French soil, the world seemed to expand. The Saumur showgrounds were like nothing she'd ever seen. Endless rows of immaculate stables, the air filled with the sounds of multiple languages, banners flapping in the breeze, horses and riders from across Europe preparing for the battle of their lives. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. She settled the horses, checked every detail, and walked the grounds, her nerves buzzing. There were familiar faces, old rivals, cup winners, professionals with teams of grooms and managers. She kept her head down, focused on her little family, refusing to be intimidated. But as she made her way back to the barn, she felt a presence. Julian Croft stood near the British delegation's tent, flanked by lawyers and sponsors. His gaze met hers, cool and appraising, no longer merely dismissive but openly hostile, as if daring her to take another step. Freya squared her shoulders, met his stare, and kept walking. She had come too far to be frightened now. That evening, she sat with Star, Thunder, and Ash beneath the foreign stars. She thought of all the threats, the doubts, the cruelty she'd endured, and realized that she was still here, still fighting. "We belong here," she whispered, her voice steady in the dark. "No matter what they throw at us, we belong." In the distance, the lights of Saumur flickered. Freya listened to the steady sound of horses breathing, the quiet night alive with possibility and danger. She knew the real test was still ahead, but so was her chance to show the world who she really was. And this time, she would not let anyone, not even the shadows, steal that away. Dawn broke over Saumur, spilling gold across the centuries-old stones and the lush, dewy fields where the best horses in Europe grazed. The air was sharp and clean, full of possibility. For Freya, it carried the heaviness of expectation and the exhilarating ache of hope. The shadows of Croft's threats and the gossip that had swirled back home still lingered, but they seemed thinner now, less substantial in this new world. She reminded herself, you can't outrun fear, but you can ride right through it. Freya awoke in the cramped quarters she'd been given, a room so small that her suitcase doubled as a nightstand. Her first thought was always for her horses. She hurried down to the stables, boots crunching on gravel, the crisp morning biting at her cheeks. Star was already waiting for her, ears pricked, eyes bright with anticipation. Thunder's deep rumble of greeting echoed as Freya entered, and Ash's soft whinny warmed her heart. Morning chores became a kind of meditation. She checked their legs, brushed out their manes, murmured encouragement as she worked. All around her, other teams moved with the efficiency and calm of old pros, matching jackets, perfectly coordinated equipment, handlers and trainers and veterinarians fussing over every detail. In contrast, Freya worked alone, moving carefully but without any sense of inferiority. She knew her horses better than anyone else could. The first day of practice round was tense. Freya led Star into the warm-up ring, acutely aware of every eye on her. Her tack was simple, well-worn but clean. Her riding clothes, a modest set borrowed from Ellie, didn't match the sleek, custom-fitted gear of her rivals. She mounted up, feeling a surge of nerves as she circled the ring. But as soon as she and Star began their routine, the rest of the world faded. The mare moved with confidence, executing every movement with growing ease. A few missteps drew snickers from a group of bystanders. Someone muttered about British charity cases. But Star didn't flinch, and neither did Freya. Instead, she let herself focus on the rhythm, the subtle communication that only years of trust could build. As the day wore on, she rotated through the horses, running practice jumps with Thunder, working on Ash's dressage, patiently ironing out their nerves. Every round brought improvement. Every small victory, a clean line, a flawless halt, was worth celebrating. By evening, Freya was exhausted, but for the first time since arriving, she believed they truly belonged. That night, back in her room, she checked her phone. Hundreds of messages flooded her inbox. Old friends, townsfolk, total strangers, all sending encouragement, advice, or offers of small help. The feed store owner had started a fundraising campaign online, and people all over England were chipping in. Someone sent photos of Team Freya posters hung in the windows of the local bakery and the clinic where she worked. Ellie called just as Freya was about to go to sleep. "We're all watching," she said, her voice full of pride. "Doesn't matter what happens, Freya, you made it here. You already changed everything for people back home." Freya wiped a tear from her cheek, overwhelmed and grateful. "Thank you, Ellie, for believing, for sticking by me even when I doubted myself." Ellie laughed. "I'd do it all again. And so would your horses." The next days passed in a blur. Freya rose before dawn, trained through aches and fatigue, studied the competition, and adjusted her strategies. She leaned on the small group of supporters who had come with her. The British team's farrier, a kind French stable hand who brought extra hay, even a local vet who admired her determination and double-checked the horse's health for free. Still, the shadow of Julian Croft lingered. Rumors swirled that he was behind every official random inspection of her gear and paperwork. One morning, a French official arrived with a clipboard and a translator, informing Freya that her horses would undergo an unscheduled drug test. Her heart pounded as she complied, watching them take blood samples and swabs with a professional detachment that masked her fury. After they left, Freya's hands shook as she groomed Ash. "They're just trying to rattle you," Luke said, appearing in the doorway. He had flown in last minute, using his savings and the money raised by their supporters. "You're still standing. That's all that matters." Freya looked up, searching his face for any hint of doubt. "What if I fail, Luke? What if this was all just luck and stubbornness?" Luke shook his head, his gaze steady. "It's not luck, Freya. It's heart. Nobody can buy that." The first qualifying round arrived, and with it, a nervous energy so electric, Freya felt it in her bones. Star danced beneath her, picking up on the tension. As she entered the arena, the crowd's roar filled her ears. She spotted the British team in the stands, waving flags. And in the VIP section, Julian Croft watched from behind mirrored sunglasses, his lips pressed into a thin line. Freya cleared her mind. She and Star attacked the course with focus, each jump a test of trust and memory. The mare flew, clearing every rail, responding to Freya's cues with confidence born of 100 hard days. They finished with a time just inside the cutoff. Not perfect, but good enough. The announcer's voice carried across the arena. "And that's a clear round for Miller and Star." Thunder and Ash performed just as well. Freya's team, once dismissed as misfits, climbed steadily up the rankings. Spectators began to whisper, then cheer. Reporters started asking about her background, her methods, her journey. She answered with honesty, never letting herself be baited by questions about Croft, the rumors, or the past. By the end of the third day, Freya had done what no one thought possible. She had silenced the doubters, if only for a moment, and set herself up for a spot in the finals. Her horses were healthy, her spirit unbroken, her reputation spreading through the showgrounds not as a fluke, but as a fighter. That evening, after the qualifying results were posted, Luke found Freya standing at the edge of the field, watching the sun set over the French countryside. He handed her a mug of tea, their old ritual from childhood. "I saw the Croft team's lawyer in the stands," Luke said. "Looked like he was about to swallow his own tie." "You rattled them, Freya." She grinned, exhaustion giving way to joy. "We did it, didn't we? One more day." Luke looked at her, admiration shining in his eyes. "However this ends, you've already won. Remember that." Freya nodded, watching as Star, Thunder, and Ash grazed in the golden light. The air was thick with the promise of tomorrow. For the first time, she felt ready, not because she was fearless, but because she had learned to stand with her fear and ride forward anyway. Tomorrow would be the final, and the greatest test of all. But tonight, as darkness settled over Saumur, Freya allowed herself to dream, not just of victory, but of everything she and her horses had already reclaimed. Dignity, belonging, and the courage to rise against any challenge, no matter how daunting. And no matter what happened next, the world would remember their story. The morning of the finals arrived shrouded in mist, the Saumur showgrounds glistening with dew and anticipation. Even the air seemed charged, every breath carrying the weight of 1,000 hopes and the silent hum of nerves. Freya awoke before her alarm, the memory of last night's dream, galloping beneath a gold sky, laughter rising above the roar of a crowd, still clinging to her like a promise. She dressed in silence, hands steady as she laced her boots and buttoned her jacket. The British team had provided her with a new shirt and jacket for the finals, crisp and perfect, but she still slipped her lucky coin into her pocket, the one Ellie gave her before she left. Old habits, she smiled to herself, die hard. Out in the stables, Star greeted her with a nicker. Thunder stomped with excitement, and Ash nudged her shoulder, searching her face for reassurance. Freya paused with each one, resting her forehead to theirs, letting their steady breath remind her, no matter what happened today, they had already won. Outside, the showgrounds had transformed. Crowds pressed against the rails, flags from a dozen countries flapped in the wind, and news cameras clustered everywhere. The schedule had been shuffled at the last minute. A judge told Freya in a low voice that a formal complaint had come in about her tack. Julian Croft's work, no doubt. Still, she stayed calm, answering every question, submitting to every check. The stewards examined Star's bridle, Thunder's shoes, Ash's paperwork. Each time, everything came up clean. They left, satisfied but disappointed, their attempt to rattle her foiled by her relentless honesty and preparation. But the real test, she knew, would not be so easy. Just before her first round, a tall official approached, flanked by a woman in a dark suit. "Ms. Miller, I'm afraid there's been an official complaint about your saddle. Allegations that it's been altered to give you an unfair advantage. We need to inspect it immediately." Freya's heart thudded, but she nodded. She unclipped the saddle, hands steady even as her mind raced. The inspection was long and thorough, the official taking measurements, examining every stitch. Around her, whispers started, doubt in the crowd, suspicion on the faces of some riders. Freya felt the heat of all those eyes but didn't flinch. At last, the judge looked up. "It's in perfect order," he said. "No violations." Relief flooded her. As the officials left, Freya mounted Star, legs feeling light, her mind clearing with each breath. "It's just us now," she whispered. "Let's show them who we are." The announcer's voice echoed across the grounds. And now, representing the United Kingdom, Freya, Miller, and Star. The roar that rose from the stands made her pulse race. She closed her eyes for a split second, then gave Star the lightest nudge. They entered the arena, the world tightening to a tunnel of color and sound. The course was brutal. Jumps set at impossible angles, tight turns, water hazards glinting in the sun. The rails looked impossibly high, and Freya knew every rider before her had struggled. 2 had been eliminated, 3 more racked up penalty points that dashed their dreams of victory. She shut out the noise, focusing on Star. The mare was tense beneath her, but Freya whispered encouragement, guiding her with the smallest cues. The first jump loomed. Star soared, clearing it easily. Next, a triple combination. Star stumbled at the first rail but recovered, listening, trusting, believing. One by one, they conquered each obstacle. When Star hesitated at the water, Freya leaned low and whispered, "You can do this." The mare responded, stretching long and clearing the jump as the crowd gasped. Halfway through, Freya felt sweat trickle down her back, but her mind was cool and clear. Each fence was a problem to solve, each stride a silent conversation. At the final turn, she spotted Julian Croft in the VIP box. He was on his feet, lips pressed tight, eyes locked on her every move. She thought of the journey that brought her here. Auction dust, winter frost, the laughter of friends, the silent hope of a whole town rooting for her. She thought of the threats, the gossip, the fear she'd almost let win. Not today. The last fence approached. Star gathered herself, Freya's heart hammering in rhythm with her strides. They flew over, clear, not a single rail down. The arena erupted, shouts, applause, the thunder of hundreds of feet and hands. Freya barely heard her own name over the noise as she pulled Star up, tears streaming down her cheeks. The scoreboard flashed, clear round, fastest time so far. But there was one more rider left, Croft's newest champion, a stallion worth millions. The arena went silent as they entered, and for a moment, Freya's heart clenched with old doubt. The rider circled, then began, powerful, elegant, flawless for most of the course. Then, at the second-to-last fence, the stallion clipped a rail. It tumbled to the ground with a clatter that echoed like destiny. The crowd let out a collective gasp. The announcer's voice was almost trembling. And that means our winner, representing the United Kingdom, Freya Miller and Star. For a heartbeat, Freya just stood there, unable to move. Then Ellie and Luke burst through the crowd, hugging her, tears and laughter mingling. Even the British team's coach, who doubted her at first, clapped her on the back. She led Star, Thunder, and Ash into the winner's circle. The national anthem played, the Union Jack rose, and the whole world seemed to hold its breath. On the podium, Freya accepted the trophy, hands shaking with joy. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded close. "What do you want to say to everyone watching?" Freya glanced at her horses, then at the crowd, at Ellie, at Luke, at the faces of strangers who'd become family through hope. "Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth," she said, voice steady. "No matter where you come from, no matter what people say you can't do, believe in yourself and fight for those who don't have a voice. That's all that matters." The crowd erupted. Even Julian Croft, standing at the edge of the arena, gave the smallest nod, a reluctant respect, or perhaps the first crack in his pride. Later, when the ceremonies were done and the world was a blur of celebration, Freya led her horses quietly out of the noise. She found a quiet hill outside the showgrounds, grass soft beneath her boots, the evening sun painting everything gold. Star grazed nearby, Thunder rolled in the grass, and Ash pressed close, seeking comfort and giving it in return. Freya sat in the silence, letting it all sink in. They had done it. They had proved that legacy wasn't written in bloodlines or bank accounts. but in the courage to keep going when the world tried to stop you. When you fight for something bigger than yourself, Freya thought, you become more than a competitor. You become a symbol, a story, a hope for someone else. And that was a victory no one could ever take away. As dusk settled, she turned to her horses, smiling through tears. "Let's go home," she whispered. "The three of you and me. We've got a life to live." The story closes with Freya leading Star, Thunder, and Ash down the quiet lane, the crowd's cheers fading behind them, a new chapter already waiting.